Wife claims she's too beautiful to be faithful. Now I'll show her the harsh reality. I'm 35, a man, and I've known my wife, who's 34, since high school. When I moved to a new city, the school was entirely unfamiliar to me. I was worried I'd have a hard time fitting in, which was a reasonable concern. But luckily, things weren't as difficult as I feared. I think that's because I made friends quickly, so I didn't stand out too much. One of the friends I made back then was Melissa. She was part of the school's photography club, and I met her when she was taking pictures near where I was sitting. From one day to the next, I became the subject of one of her photos, and she still says it's one of her favorite pictures, although I doubt that. Writing this now takes me back to those early memories, and it hurts to think how all of this may soon mean very little to me. But back to the story. We became good friends after that, and in our senior year, our friendship turned into something more serious. It just felt right, honestly. Even though we went to colleges in different states, it didn't affect our relationship. We spent a lot of time emailing, texting, and talking on the phone. Eventually, we got married, and that was 10 years ago. Time really does fly. It's no surprise Melissa became a professional photographer. She now has her own studio and has worked in some amazing places during her career, which occasionally required her to travel to other states or even abroad. But I never felt like this was a problem. As I matured, it became clear to me just how beautiful Melissa is. At the time, I thought she was cute, but that wasn't the main reason we became friends and later partners. Her personality was the driving factor. But now, I realize how blessed I am to have such a stunning wife. The only issue with being married to someone so attractive is that you need to be secure in yourself. Early on, I wasn't. I often felt like other men were just one step away from taking her from me, but she was calm and open with me in those early years, and over time, I stopped worrying about who she worked with or that kind of thing. However, as we've gotten older, I've noticed my wife starting to change. Not in a particularly negative way, but it seemed like a mild midlife crisis. She began worrying much more about her legacy, and despite never wanting children, she brought up freezing her eggs in about 10 different conversations. At first, I said no, but by the third time I realized it wasn't just a passing thought and encouraged her to go through with it, which she eventually did. Then she started going to the gym, which I initially thought was just her trying to stay in shape as she aged. To me, she was still beautiful, but there was no harm in supporting her decision. I've always been active myself, running and cycling often, so I was even happy about her new lifestyle. The real issue began when she started hanging out with a group of women she met at the gym. She talked about them constantly. There were 3 women, one was older and married, but the other 2 were single and in their early 20s. I don't think there's anything wrong with being friends with much younger people, but the problem was that these friendships became very typical of the young party scene. Melissa, who once enjoyed sipping wine, reading a book, or watching a movie, suddenly started talking about going to bars, clubs, and all kinds of girls' nights out. At first, I saw no issue and even encouraged the first few outings, but when I realized this was becoming almost a weekly thing, I started feeling uncomfortable. Honestly, I believe that a married woman shouldn't frequently engage in these late-night activities unless her husband is with her. There's not much good that can come from it. I'm not a pushover, but when I saw how regular these outings were becoming, I decided to step in and ask her to stop. Even though I trusted her, I was concerned about the type of environment she was exposing herself to and the influence her friends might have. This led to a massive argument. I'm not proud of it, but I told her she seemed to be having a midlife crisis. She called me controlling and insecure. In the end, it turned into one of those huge marital fights. She got upset and went out that night anyway, even though she'd initially said she wouldn't. I knew it was either to provoke me or to get away from me. She came home very late that night, much later than usual, and avoided me entirely. She took a shower and went straight to bed. When I went to the bedroom, she was already asleep, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I felt like something might have happened that night. If I know women, many of them make terrible decisions when they're angry with you as a way to get back at you. If she did something that night, she probably thought it was her form of revenge. I couldn't stop obsessing over it, and although I knew it was wrong, I decided to take her phone while she slept. I'd never done anything like that before, but at that moment, it felt like the only option. It was nerve-wracking, but now I'm relieved I did it. She mostly chats on Messenger, so that's where I went first. After unlocking her phone, I saw a group chat called Fit and Fierce. I almost laughed at the name, but didn't have time to focus on that because the messages were something else. Any group chat like that, if made public, could probably get someone arrested. But beyond how scandalous everyone's messages were, including my wife's, one message she sent caught my attention. It was from that very night. My heart sank as I read it, but I didn't care about my fear anymore once I saw the content. She wrote, "He's trying to control the wrong person. Honestly, I'm too pretty to be loyal. I've been stuck with him my whole life and never got to use my looks the way most women do. Let me get attention, let me get favors." Afterward, her friends encouraged her, asking if he was handsome or well-endowed. The way I felt, I hate even remembering it. It still feels like a sharp pain in my chest. Even though this happened over a week ago, it felt like my entire world was crumbling. I thought her nights out were just a small inconvenience in our marriage, something we'd eventually work through and return to normal. I never imagined it would be the end of our relationship. This is someone I've known for 20 years of my life. While I was happily married to her, she felt trapped. Interpreting it that way was devastating. But that's me being emotional because, in reality, all her messages showed she cheated on me without regret and would probably do it again. That's assuming this was the first time she betrayed me. It's highly likely it's happened before, maybe even early in our relationship. She seems like the type of woman who regrets not having a wild phase. Is that how most women think? I'm so confused. I didn't even take screenshots that night because I was so overwhelmed. The next day, my mood was awful, but she didn't bother asking why, probably because our fight was still fresh. That night, I managed to gather more evidence on her phone, including additional messages where she described what happened, how great it was, and how she couldn't even remember his name, followed by lots of laughing, like it was something to be proud of. I was, and still am, shattered. So this is where I am now. I'm utterly lost about what to do. Obviously, I know I can't stay with someone like this. I've already given too much of my life to her, but I need her to feel what I'm feeling. I don't want to cheat back, because I'm better than that. I've spent 10 years in a clean marriage, and I'll continue keeping it that way, but I need to hurt her. I'm done being the pleading one. Update 1, just a quick update. But things have gotten pretty complicated. Part of me regrets taking this path because my life is going to be chaotic over the next few months. But I think this is one of those situations where I need to go through short-term discomfort to achieve long-term peace. I confronted Melissa about everything after discovering what she'd been doing. I waited for her to come home one night, and when she tried to head straight to the shower, I stopped her. It was obvious she didn't want me getting too close to her, but I could smell alcohol on her breath and what seemed like a man's cologne. She kept trying to avoid me, and when I asked what was going on, she just said nothing. I don't know why that answer enraged me so much. Maybe because I'd spent the last week torturing myself with anxiety, stress, and paranoia, while for her, apparently, nothing was wrong. That's when I told her outright that I knew she was cheating, and man, I let out everything I'd been holding in. I quoted her words, asking if she truly believed she was too beautiful to be faithful. I asked if she really thought she had wasted her best years with me. I questioned why she was so desperate for a free girl phase and told her I knew she was having some kind of midlife crisis. I said a lot, and she admitted to ruining our marriage on her own, but at least now she'd have the chance to be free and do whatever she wanted. During all of this, she just stared at me silently until, out of nowhere, she started crying. Maybe she actually reflected on what she'd done and realized that the risk she'd taken wasn't worth what she was about to lose. Like every cheater, she wanted the best of both worlds, but I wasn't going to let that happen. She collapsed on the floor, and I stood over her, continuing to vent all my anger. Honestly, I had so much built-up rage that I needed to let it all out. I didn't want to resort to physical violence, but I knew that no matter what I said, no one could stop me. In the end, I told her to pack her things and leave. She was still on the floor crying, so I went to the bedroom and started putting together a bag of essentials for her. When I was nearly done, she crawled toward me and threw herself at my feet, but I pushed her away. It was incredibly frustrating. I had to call an Uber to take her to her mother's house, and I put her things in the car. Only then did she leave, reluctantly. A few days later, I made sure she received the divorce papers at her mum's house and had to deal with countless calls after that. Of course, I didn't answer any of them because there's nothing left to say to her, or to her mother, at least not right now. I'm just waiting for the divorce process to start and finish so I can put all of this behind me. I never thought I'd end up divorced, but happens fast. Now, all I need to do is ensure that I truly hurt her in return. I've been wounded, but I need to make sure she feels far more pain than I do. Update 2. The saga has finally ended, and the sense of relief I feel now that all of this is over is hard to express, but honestly, I feel great. Let me try to explain what happened without being too repetitive. Eventually, we had to go through the whole divorce process, and that part wasn't fun at all. After all the crying and yelling, Melissa became very bitter, and it seemed like her only goal at that point was to make my life as difficult as possible. She would send me threatening messages in the middle of the night, claiming I had ruined her life. At one point, security cameras caught her standing across the street at 3 a.m. Instead of trying to reach a sensible agreement, she and her lawyer were asking for ridiculous amounts of money as compensation after all those years of marriage. The only problem was that I knew I wouldn't be the one paying anything. I've always been smart with my money, so my savings had been healthy for a long time. But when I knew the divorce was coming, I spent a lot of time working with my lawyer to find creative ways to make my money inaccessible to her. Of course, I couldn't make it all disappear, but we managed to secure a good portion safely. However, I wasn't just focused on protecting my own money, I wanted a good chunk of hers as well. She'd worked as a photographer for a long time, not a low-level photographer, so she always had money. I wanted a share of that, and this time I didn't care about being greedy. Using the evidence I had showing her clear admission of guilt and lack of remorse, I hoped to not only get a substantial amount from her, but also make her pay for my legal costs. This was requested from the beginning. The best part was that her harassment was documented, but she clearly hadn't thought of that when she was standing outside my house in the middle of the night. I knew I would make her regret every action she took after betraying me. When we found out that the judge would be assigned to the case, my lawyer relaxed, saying things were about to go in our favor because the judge was very strict. With the evidence of her infidelity, the harassment, the lack of remorse, and even the absurd request she made for an amicable separation, the judge granted us nearly everything we asked for. Melissa ended up with very little, only keeping the car, which she sold soon after. Honestly, it felt great. She was never good at saving, so she ran out of money quickly, especially since I preferred a lump sum payment over alimony. That left her with nothing. She won't be without money for long, I know that, but she'll definitely have a much harder life ahead, especially since, after all the harassment and insults, she tried to call me drunk a few nights after the divorce was finalized, talking about how she missed me and how her life was a mess now. I ignored the call because I found it amusing, but in the end, I hung up without saying anything more. Now I'm on top, and it feels amazing because I didn't deserve to be betrayed. Now it's her turn to feel the pain. She'll bounce back eventually, but I hope she takes a lesson with her.